Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here on a wonderful Thursday evening, along with Manny Hill. We are live here again tonight, and a fun conversation I have on tap, which was inspired by a discussion that I had with Mike Sando of ESPN earlier today. So, Manny, how we doing? There's some National Football League going on, and I see Kyle Pitts. Just when you think Kyle Pitts is done, he drags you back in with a big first drive for the Atlanta Falcons. But an interesting NFC South battle going on here as we chat. So if you want to jump into the chat, ask us questions, comments, we're going to have a good discussion, and then also going to do our pick'ems, decide who Manny thinks is going to win. And the list that I am really intrigued by is Manny's all-time favorite Jets. So many different ways to go with this one. So how are we doing tonight, man?
Doing pretty good, and yeah, Kyle Pitts, bringing me right back in. He's on the only fantasy team that I'm playing this season, and he's been quite the letdown so far. And hopefully, Kirk Cousins can get him the ball a little bit more and help out my fantasy team more than anything.
What do you think it is with him, with Kyle Pitts? Is it just the nature of tight ends? I think this is my theory about tight ends is number one, that they take a really long time to develop. TJ Hawkinson is one of the best in the league, but I think Detroit fans would have told you, oh, TJ Hawkinson, he wasn't a bust, but he just wasn't that good. He comes to Minnesota, you go, whoa, this guy is fantastic. And then, somebody like Pitts, it might just take a couple years. He's kind of banged up perpetually. It seems like it's also that everyone wants a giant wide receiver as opposed to a real tight end with some grit and some dirt to him. But I don't know how much grit and dirt Kyle Pitts has to his game. That might be a part of it. And also that there's only so much those guys can do. It's not like Jordan Addison, who could just juke somebody out, run by him, you're open. You need to be schemed open if you're a tight end and then use your wingspan. I think all that stuff kind of plays into feeling like it's a little out of their hands sometimes.
Yeah, and I feel like with Kyle Pitts too, there was so much hype coming into like his draft year. Like there were so many people that were just high in him. Like this guy's going to be a beast. He's going to be a monster. He's going to be like one of the all-time great tight ends that we've ever seen. He's going to revolutionize the position and all of that. And the reality is like a lot of these guys, it just takes a couple of years before they really start to blossom as players. And I think if you're Raheem Morris and you're the Falcons, I think you just have to kind of stay patient with him. Hopefully, he's got a veteran quarterback who's been very productive in Kirk Cousins, throwing him the ball now. Hopefully, that sort of relationship starts to grow and develop over the course of the year. And then, eventually they're going to have to figure out if they're going to pay him and keep him on the team long term. And I think this is kind of one of those seasons that might kind of decide what direction they go with him.
Just real quick before we get into the main thing I want to talk to you about, and we don't know as we record this how this game is going to play out between the Bucks and the Falcons, but who do you think is better, like long term? Do you think that Atlanta is going to get it together? They won last week against the Saints, pretty big win for them. Whether they get a win or not, it's still early in the season, because I think that Kirk has looked better and better for them each week after early in the season. Just like press the panic button on the
Yeah.
way that Kirk Cousins looked. But he seems to have figured out how to drag his leg back around pretty well and run play action stuff a little bit better after he couldn't really run it at all for week one. His chemistry with his receivers has been going okay. But I still don't think that they're a very good team. They seem like a classic Kirk Cousins 9-8 type of football team.
Yeah, and it might, being in that division might actually be good enough to win it. I mean, and Tampa Bay is a team that I can't really figure out because, they make the playoffs last year with Baker, they win a game, and they play the Lions really tough in the second round. And you're thinking, okay, well, maybe they've got something going here. But then you get Baker Mayfield coming out and talking about, whatever was the relationship with Tom Brady and the players the previous time around, and it was stressful. And it's like, well, Baker, they won a Super Bowl. You haven't really done that yet. So you kind of wonder if like, all right, well, where's his head at now? for that team going forward. He's got his money now. He got, they paid him a nice contract. Um, where is that team going to go? I'm not sure Todd Bowles is really a great coach. And I think that, trying to figure out with what's going to happen with New Orleans this year. I'm still trying to figure out what kind of team they are. This is an opportunity for Atlanta, I think, to really kind of grab a hold of this division tonight. Obviously, winning tonight would help a lot. And I think I agree with you on Kirk. It seems like he's starting to kind of settle in a little bit. Maybe that's just what he needed all along, was to just start playing. I questioned whether he should have been playing after week 1 because he looked terrible. Looked like he wasn't ready. But maybe that's just what he needed. He needed to just start playing again and get settled in. Those first couple games were kind of like preseason games for him, and now he's starting to get into his groove. And I think long term too, I kind of like with what Atlanta's doing, because they have the young quarterback behind Kirk, that they can kind of fall back on and at least give a shot if things don't really work out with him. Tampa, if they're going to be kind of a middling team with Baker, you kind of wonder, okay, well, what's the plan going to be going forward for them as well?
Right. And they started off the season pretty well. It's actually, I feel like, a big game for Tampa, because if they win this game, then they can feel like they're rolling and maybe that they're legitimately competitive. And they do have a ton of talent, and Baker is very good. But I've always thought he lived in the same world as Kirk, where he's a little bit different, plays a different style. He's a little shorter. I'm not sure he sees the field as well as Kirk. I don't think he's quite as accurate, but he's more gutsy than maybe Kirk Cousins is at times, and can win games. But can he really win games at a $40 million rate, which they had to pay him? And this might be a scary thing for the Vikings, could be the tie-in, if Sam Darnold is just good enough to convince him to bring him back, but not great enough to convince the Vikings that they could compete for a Super Bowl next year. Then you get left on that island of, should you bring him back? I mean, I think that is like, what's that island for the Vikings? Is that 11 wins and 27 touchdowns, 14 picks? He doesn't carry on playing this well, but still plays really well, gets them into the playoffs, wins a playoff game. Then you come back and go, that was real good. That wasn't great, but it was real good, and we won a playoff game. Now, what exactly do we do? Right? I mean, I think that there's a very high bar, as we've mentioned, for bringing Sam Darnold back, but there's also this pocket of performance that I think would split people, even potentially split people on the team, split people in the organization, maybe split podcasters, for God's sake, could even happen. And I think that that's in fringe 30 touchdowns, 10 wins, and winning a playoff game for Darnold.
Yeah, and the thing of it is you look at the way they've started out, it looks like it's really trending that way. Like Sam Darnold, it looks like he's going to keep this up. And I think, is he leading the league in touchdowns right now? Touchdown passes, or at least, he's close to it. I mean, if he's trending right now to throw 30 plus touchdowns, and he hasn't thrown a lot of picks yet. I think he's got 3. So yeah, I mean, at this rate, you're looking at like a 33, 34 touchdown, 10 interception type of performance, probably close to 4,000 yards, if not more. That's and if it's leading to winning as well, too. I mean, if he puts up those numbers and they're 8 and 9, then you're kind of wondering, okay, well, like, how good were those numbers? How good, how good were the moments that he had throughout the season? Was it just they were down by a lot of games, or they were down in a lot of games and he was just getting garbage time numbers and things like that? Like, kind of like what we saw with Kirk for about 6 years. But to your point, like, if they go like 11 and 6 and he puts up those numbers and they win a playoff game, then it does kind of have you wondering, like, okay, well, what do we do? Like, do we give him like a Baker Mayfield type of contract? Do we franchise him? I don't know what the franchise tag number would be. I mean, with the quarterbacks making so much money now, because it's the average of the top 5 salaries.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, so it would be quite high. Yeah, to franchise tag, that would not be easy.
Yeah,
but yet that also seems like the best option. Well, we don't have to go all the way down that road, but as we talk about the different pie chart of possibilities, That's definitely one of them where they end up in the Baker Mayfield. But then again, there is maybe a 2-year contract that pays them a ton of money in the first year. Then you end up with dead space down the line. It's something we can't quite get there yet with the 4-0. But I was thinking about when Baker won the playoff game and they finished 20th in scoring, that he wasn't really good enough to give a huge contract to. And he also was definitely good enough to come back and make the playoffs again in that division. And they end up in kind of Kirkland. So it's almost a little Kirk versus Kirk here tonight with Atlanta and the Tampa Bay Bucks. But let's talk about what the headline is. And I was having a good conversation with Mike Sando of The Athletic, who is, the guy who does the QB tiers is probably where you know him. He's a weekly columnist there and used to cover Seattle. And you can go watch that on the channel later after you're done watching this one. But a really good discussion with him. And at one point, when we were just talking about how good this Vikings team is, he said, well, who would you rather be? Who would you rather be right now? How many teams are actually better than the Minnesota Vikings? Now, I posed the question to you on Monday. How would you distribute $1,000 if you had to bet it on the Super Bowl? I think that's a little bit of a different question because that's looking all the way down to the Super Bowl and trying to make a bet on a bunch of different teams for something that's super hard to project. And we're all going to put our money on Kansas City anyway because of Patrick Mahomes. That is a different question than what he said to me. How many teams are actually better? Who would you rather be? Who would you trade places with right now? The way he framed it was, instead of your Wolves hoodie and your Viking hat that you have, or your helmet, or your thing that goes, like, instead of all that, throw that out. And now you're going to go become a fan of blank because you feel like they're better than the Vikings. How many teams can you fill in that blank ahead of the Minnesota Vikings? How many teams did you come up with?
Well, I came up with 3 for sure. Um, One, San Francisco, Kansas City, and Baltimore. It was those 3 teams that I came up with that I felt like, all right, if I'm going to trade places with a fan for one of these teams, it's those 3 teams. It's one of those 3 teams that I would think about because you already kind of know what you're getting. Now, San Francisco's got the issue with Christian McCaffrey and what's going to happen with him. He's like going over to Europe to try and figure out what that injury is going to be, and which is kind of a scary thought with him. But I think when you look at the overall sort of culture and makeup that team has, they've been a Super Bowl contender now for really going on about 5 years now, save for some injury seasons that they've had to deal with. But they've been in the conversation like every year, pretty much for the last half decade. Kansas City obviously goes without saying with Patrick Mahomes, and even with Baltimore, I think with Lamar, Derrick Henry's really starting to emerge and really kind of solidify that running game as well, which makes them really dangerous. And they're always going to be pretty stout on the defensive side as well. So like those 3 teams for sure. I thought about Buffalo too, um, mainly just because of Josh Allen and just how great and dynamic he is. That I think they're kind of showing, because they were a team that I looked at going into this season like, all right, well, Diggs is gone. What kind of impact is that going to have on that offense? And save for Sunday night against Baltimore, I mean, they've been outstanding. They haven't really missed a beat without Diggs. So Buffalo's kind of another team that I'm thinking about as well. But for sure, San Francisco, Baltimore, and Kansas City are the teams that for sure I would trade places with.
Yeah, Buffalo is a hard one because after they blew out people in the first couple of weeks, and it wasn't a hard schedule, especially with Tua getting hurt, and then Jacksonville is just in flames at the moment. But uh, what makes me question it is that they are calling about Devontae Adams, and they
Mhm.
sold so hard on this idea that, oh no, we're good without Diggs and everything else, but it hasn't really looked that way with their passing game. And as good as Josh Allen is, I don't know that he's the same as Mahomes in the way that he can just make something out of nothing with his receivers. He can on an individual play where he can scramble and make a play and do something spectacular. But before he had Stephon Diggs, then after he got him and what that looked like, it
Yeah.
was a very stark difference of him as a quarterback. And that's Not to say that he's not a great quarterback. If I was drafting all QBs in the entire league, I'd probably pick him number 2 right behind Patrick Mahomes. So that is no downgrade, but it is a different world when you don't have a guy who can just get open all the time. And for a while, he and Stephon Diggs were on so much the same page that they were unstoppable for a couple years there. And maybe it's easy to forget that after it goes sour, but between those two. But now when you look at it, it's like, who do they really have here that scares you? And if you're an opponent like the Ravens, take away a couple of those middling receivers. Keon Coleman doesn't look like he's anything all that special. And
Right.
then force Josh Allen to kind of play hero. And what we know is he will turn the ball over sometimes when he's playing hero. And the Ravens did such a great job of containing him. When I look at what the Vikings have surrounding their quarterback versus what the Bills have, oh my gosh, it's nowhere close. It's not even in the same ballpark. And when you can make an argument for having a top 5 defense right now, probably the number 1 defense in the league, but top 5, I would project it forward for the Vikings and all the things around their quarterback, that evens out that argument of, okay, I would take that quarterback over almost anybody else. But I'm just not convinced that Buffalo can really go that far when they couldn't get over Kansas City in the biggest moments with Stephon Diggs, as great as he was for all those seasons. Baltimore is a good pick. They started out slow and everyone freaked out, but I mean, they are just every year with Lamar. They're
Yeah.
always there. And once they beat Dallas, it seemed like the light kind of went on for them and they're going to be fine and they're going to be a contender. That's a great pick. Detroit is probably the one that I would say definitively that I think I would take over the Vikings. And the reason is just how much more proven their quarterback is, because
Yeah.
they can argue that they have everything the Vikings have. They have a better line, the best line. They have great weapons in the backfield. They have great receivers. Now, Jamison Williams finally coming to life for that team. He hasn't gambled on anything from a team hotel so far as I know recently. And one of the best offensive play callers in the league in Ben Johnson. Though here's the Vikings Lions comparison, which of course, after the bye week, we're going to go really all deep in on this. The Lions Vikings comparison, though, I would so much rather have Brian Flores in this defense than Aaron Glenn in their defense.
Yeah.
Watching them get diced up at times by Geno Smith, who's been great this year. And I like Geno a lot. We love journeymen who succeed on the show, but he was really ripping them apart at times during that game. And I have just been sold over and over on how great of a defensive coordinator this guy is. Please let me know when this arrives, when this actually happens, because I always heard that Brian Flores was a great defensive mind. He showed up and I went, oh my gosh, this guy is incredible. And I'm supposed to see it, aren't I? And they said, well, no, we've added some talent in the offseason. But then under the bright lights against a good quarterback and some good weapons, they're getting diced up. And I expect the Vikings to score a ton of points against them again. But I can't go against the quarterback who's been to the Super Bowl, been to the NFC Championship game versus a quarterback who's really had 4 games. And what this really tells you, number one, is how good of a roster the Vikings have versus the rest of the league. Because we're placing our bet here on the Vikings and we're saying we'd rather be them than all these other teams when there are so many more proven quarterbacks in the league. But my bar is all the way up at these great quarterbacks, saying for sure that I would rather be them right now. That's for 2024. How about this though, man? You might know where I'm headed with this. How about for 2025? How about for the long term? How many more franchises would you be? And that includes your stability, your coaching staff, the quarterback situation, the players under contract. Because this one is hard to argue that there are many after what we've seen. This is right now. This could all change in 3 weeks and we could be calling for everybody to be fired. But as of right now, the feeling with O'Connell, Flores, you get to keep Jefferson. You've got 2 quarterbacks going forward, potentially, if you keep Darnold. But if not, you have a top quarterback to turn it over to with these circumstances. Washington might be an answer here with Jaden Daniels, potentially. You could still pick Chicago if you think that Caleb Williams is going to be better and that's going to be the difference maker. because right now supporting casts are dominating, but we could be seeing a swing back eventually where top quarterbacks dominate everything.
Yeah, and Houston's another team that you can probably look at
Mhm.
because they've got the young quarterback and the young receivers, and plus, Stephon Diggs is there as well. Um, and they seem to have a really good foundation. D'Amico Ryan just feels like he's really established a really good, like, solid winning culture there as well. Um, yeah, I mean, Washington's interesting because we're seeing, Jaden Daniels perform pretty well as a rookie, and maybe not quite as well as CJ Stroud did as a rookie last year, but they're winning games. They're in first place in that division right now with the Eagles and Cowboys, who are supposedly supposed to be better. They're both have their issues right now, especially Philadelphia. Um, and those are two teams, honestly, that I would not really want to be right now. That I would definitely take the Vikings over from the standpoint of a long term because, uh, to your point, the Vikings, they have the head coach, they've got the defensive coordinator, they've got the defensive players on that side, they've got terrific weapons on offense. It feels like a lot of stability, a lot of certainty that you've got the right guy leading the team, and you have options at the quarterback position. If Sam Darnold continues to play well like this, if he plays like an MVP level, then yeah, maybe you can sign him to a long-term contract, and then you can kind of figure out what you want to do with JJ McCarthy at that point. But if Sam, sort of tails off towards the end of the season, doesn't play as well, well, you have an option of going to JJ McCarthy and going back to kind of your original plan of drafting him and having him, probably take over in 2025 as your quarterback. So the Vikings are in a really good spot. It's hard to really look at a lot of teams. I mean, obviously Kansas City, as long as they've got Mahomes, they're always going to be in the conversation long term, as long as he's healthy and good. And I know he hasn't looked good at times this season, but I mean, they haven't even looked great offensively, and they're still one of the best teams in the league, and that's just because of him. So obviously, they're an easy answer. Baltimore, I think long term because Lamar is still young, I still kind of like their potential, future over the next couple of years to kind of stay in the mix and stay competitive. It's hard to really figure out outside of that, though. I think the Vikings, from what we've seen so far, they just seem to be in really, really good shape for the immediate for this year to possibly contend, and for the next several years as well.
And it just happened all of the sudden, which
Yeah.
leads me to my last question for you that I want to get to comments and questions in the comment section. Very welcome. Whatever is on your mind doesn't have to be about this subject and reactions to what we're saying here. So all the statements we just made, what we're looking at right now with a 4-game sample of information that has been given to us, that has been as impressive of a 4-game section of Vikings football as I have covered since I got here. Even the 2016 hot start was nothing like this. They didn't beat teams like this. They didn't beat them in the same way as they have beaten these teams. 2017, probably the run where Case Keenum got hot and they beat Atlanta and the Rams. That was something. And the Lions on Thanksgiving Day. Okay, those are good teams. Beating them one after the other. That was pretty good. I can't remember a run in 2019 that was like this, where I just went, man, this team, wow, they are really freaking good. What is your confidence percentage, though? Give me out of 100 in everything we just said that we would listen back to this. Maybe this is what we'll do 4 weeks from now, and our confidence that we'll be like, yeah, we were right, because the NFL can change our minds very quickly.
Yeah.
4 weeks from now. So what's your percentage chance that 4 weeks from now you will watch this back, this first 20 minutes of the show, and agree with yourself on the short and the long term about the Minnesota Vikings?
I think it's about 75%.
Mhm.
I feel pretty good. I mean, I think you always have to kind of leave room for, potential injuries, something. I mean, knock on wood, and we've kind of seen him get nicked up a little bit. If something happens to Sam Darnold and this team is subjected to having Nick Mullins starting games for them, it's going to change a lot. It's really going to change a lot. And it's hard to imagine like saying that about Sam Darnold, considering the start to his career. That, oh my God, if Sam Darnold gets hurt, this team is bleeped. But if Sam Darnold gets hurt, I think this team's kind of bleeped. I think
Oh,
it's
yes.
it's a significant drop off down in Nick Mullins.
Mhm.
Um, so I think you always have to kind of leave room for that. But I think just with the way they've played against, you mentioned it, the way they played against quality opponents and the way they have really kind of dominated these games. And I know the second half of the Packer game was kind of a mess. I was frustrated as in the moment as much as anybody. But the fact that they jumped out 28 nothing on that team, a Packers team that's pretty good. And, maybe depending on Jordan Love, how he continues to grow and develop, that might be another team that you might have to think about in these conversations about like, where do they stack up against the Vikings long term and in the immediate? But to get up 28 nothing on that team, to dominate Houston the way they did, to play the way they did against San Francisco, it's all really impressive. And the schedule gets a little bit lighter now as we get into October and November. There's a lot more beatable teams. It's some road games that could be tough and tricky, potentially some trap games, but this is setting up pretty nicely for them to be like 8-2 ish, once they get to about the 10 game mark. And at that point, I don't know how you're not believing that this team is serious and can make some noise in the playoffs once they get there.
I might go I might go a little lower, and here's why. Than 75% confidence. Number one is if they lose this game on Sunday, then you have back-to-back games against really good teams.
Yeah,
The Lions have no fear of US Bank Stadium. LA is on the road. And I know it's a home road game, but it's also you play a hard division opponent, then travel. That's always a difficult combination of those things. And if you mess around, you could be 4-3 all of the sudden, and we could be going, oh yeah, everything we said, just throw it out.
sure.
That's not right. So I think that's possible. Yeah, I was already kind of factoring in for injuries that those happen and they're realistic. That if this team did lose a few key players, maybe we're not talking about them being as strong because so far, outside of a couple games from Addison and Ivan Pace, they have been healthy with all the key pieces. You get a rash of injuries, and this is clearly not going to be the same team. So I'm not quite as confident on that. As far as the long term, the biggest thing that could change my mind about them being the team of the future in the NFC North, outside of Detroit's window is going to last for a couple more years, is if by week 8 Caleb Williams was absolutely balling. If he was just
Mhm.
going crazy, he clicks in, he's phenomenal, he's making plays left and right, and he's winning back forth. I'd be like, that's not good for the Vikings. That's not good for their long term. I think that the process they have for their team building, for their leadership, for their culture, for the type of players that Brian Flores gets, and the other part is too, I am 95% sure Brian Flores isn't going anywhere. I'm not 100% sure. And if he went somewhere, that does change the dynamic because you don't know if you're getting another Brian Flores. The defenses were never the same in Miami after Brian Flores left, and they still haven't been. They've been okay, but they have not been great. And
Right.
what they've got here is pretty darn impressive. I think what they have for a young quarterback to go to is really good, and that will bode well for them to continue to build on what they have. But if Caleb is great, or by the way, the Packers are 2-2. They're not 0-14. And if they end up something like 11-6 or 12-5, if they get hot and Jordan Love looks great and he's talked about as one of the top 5 quarterbacks, that's another thing that would make me go, okay, if Jordan Love is on the same level as Josh Allen, which he does have some of the talent and made some of the throws last week, then, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think he'll be very good, but I don't think he's going to be on the same level as Allen. But if he is, same deal. Then
Yeah.
okay, well then my confidence at them being in the best position would go down after that. So I'm curious about thoughts and any other questions, comments that you guys have. Jump in, and I have some more things for Manny as well before we get to your favorite New York Jets of all time. Sean says thoughts on the possibility of trading for a defensive tackle. thinking Campbell since Miami are toast and he's old but effective. Man, Calais Campbell, I would love to watch him play football up close. That is a humongous human being. Maybe we get him for a 7th-round pick. As far as making trades, Manny, I think that they have to be probably 6-2 to make those trades, wouldn't you say? But I've said this, I'm all in on whatever they want to do. If somebody brought up the idea of Christian Wilkins, sign that huge contract with the Raiders, another team that's just kind of collapsing and is not all that good, and Devontae Adams wants to leave, I think the Raiders will want to keep him as a centerpiece. But if there's a player out there who is expensive and good and their team is floundering, then trade whatever you need to trade, because this is one of those years and you're that good and you should take a shot at it. That's how I think. I'm not thinking long term once you get to 4-0. I'm thinking 2024, try to win in every way you can. But maybe you're a little more pragmatic about the future than I am.
No, I mean, I like that sort of that 6-2, 7, or yeah, I guess it would be eight games. They would have to have played 8 games by the time the trade deadline comes around, right? So yeah, so you're probably looking at it like a 6-2, or if they're like 7-1 or something like that, then yeah, I think you have to, because we can look at this team and say, oh yeah, they're setting themselves up for to have some long-term success with the young quarterback that they have waiting, and all the weapons, and the salary cap situation they're going to have over the next few years. But you just never know. Nothing is guaranteed. And sometimes I think when you are presented with an opportunity and you realize, you're looking around, you're like, these guys are pretty bleeping good. We have a pretty damn good football team right now. Let's just go right now and try and do this. And if we, because they've got what, like three picks next year? Was it a first, a second, and a fifth or something next year? Something
They'll
like
get
that.
some compensatory action, but you can't trade those. So yeah,
Right.
there's not much to work with there as far as
Yeah.
trades go.
But if you find yourself at 6-2, 7-1, and you can get, I don't know, can you get a Christian Wilkins from the Raiders for like a 2nd-round pick? If you can, I would do it. Why not? I mean, at that point, because, and he's also a guy that, like, if you trade for him, then with his contract and everything, it's not like he's a rent-a player. You would have him. I don't know how many years he signed there, but you would have him for beyond just this season. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things you have to seriously think about. Depending on, now again, if they lose a few games here between now and then, and they're like 4-3, then maybe you probably don't want to do that. But if you're in first place, or you're fighting with Detroit for first place in the division, and you're kicking everybody's ass, and you've got a chance here, I think you have to do it. You owe it, I think, to the players and the fans to really go all in to give yourself a shot, because you never know how many of these opportunities you're actually going to get.
No, that's exactly the way I look at it. I don't think that they would trade Wilkins after signing him to that contract. Maybe
Right.
Jeffrey Simmons, as Tennessee is in really rough shape. But
I take him.
I just, the way that Kwesi has looked at it is kind of F them picks in a lot of ways since he F'd up them picks in the first draft. He's been like, let's go get real players. And they've done a great job of that. TJ Hawkinson, when you talk about how he's used the draft capital, you have to include TJ Hawkinson as a guy that they got with their draft capital. And I think of the same way if they were going to make a trade here. And there is no rule that if you even trade for a guy with 1 year left on his deal that you can't re-sign him. So
Right.
if you trade for a guy with 1 year left, the Vikings have been really good at convincing football players that this is a great place to play their football. And they went out and got all these free agents who have performed as well as they have. So they could do that again with somebody else if they were able to sign him. Jason says, even if Sam wins the Super Bowl, JJ McCarthy starts week 1 of 2025. If Sam Darnold wins the Super Bowl, they will sign him to a 5-year, $500 million contract with 5 more years of options for $500 million. If Sam Darnold wins the Super Bowl, they will build a statue of him.
I was just going to say that.
US Bank Stadium.
I was just going to say that.
There is no way you let Sam Darnold walk if you win the Super Bowl. I mean, that would be the Joe Flacco 2012 thing. He was set to be a free agent. Then he wins the Super Bowl and signs a huge contract. And he never did it again, but nobody ever cared because he won the Super Bowl for that franchise. Uh, I mean, that scenario is so wild to even think about that. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's possible, but I look at it as if a guy wins you the Super Bowl, then you have to sign him and take more shots at winning the Super Bowl. That's not the hard one. The hard one is really if he is very good and gets you kind of in like a whiff of it. It gets you to the same place that Kirk got you to in 2019. Then do you run it back with him or do you take the risk? That's where it's difficult to figure out. I think if he wins the Super Bowl, then it's not difficult. Then it's resolved. Then you're good, and you could trade McCarthy to somebody else. But maybe not. I don't know. Maybe you're right. That's what Baltimore did with Trent Dilfer, but a
Yeah.
little bit different of a scenario. I guess you could say that Nick Foles didn't keep the starting job in Philly after winning, but that's also very different. That's a backup who was really old, not
Hadn't they already paid Carson Wentz at that point
I
too?
think you're right that they had already extended him,
Yeah.
or maybe not. No, I don't think that they had
Well,
already
no, because that
extended
was
him. I
only
think it was the following season they
yeah,
had
because
to.
that was only his second year. That was only Wentz's second year in the league when they won the Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then he had played well the next season and went 9-7, but I think his body started to fall apart and then he got a
Mhm.
little yipsy with throwing the football after he had been banged up so many times and it kind of devolved from there. But they did go to Wentz, but everyone knew that Nick Foles was not that quarterback. If Sam Darnold plays 17 games and then 3 playoff games and beats Mahomes, I mean, just sign US Bank Stadium over to his estate. I mean, just I don't even know. Like, what is too much to say to give Sam Darnold if he wins the Super Bowl in Minnesota? I mean, I don't
And
know.
and listen, I mean, we saw the St. Louis Rams when Trent Green got hurt in 1999 and Kurt Warner came in, won the MVP, won the Super Bowl MVP. They stuck with Kurt Warner the
Yeah.
following season as the starter and they kept
Right.
Trent Green around, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Warner ended up getting hurt that year, missing a couple games, and Green came in and played really well for the Rams that year. Of course, they went back to Kurt Warner, which ended up being, the right decision, at least for one more season with them. So, I mean, it's one of those things where if Darnold plays really well, they don't necessarily. I mean, JJ McCarthy's what, 21 years old?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't necessarily have to go to JJ McCarthy in 2025. If Sam plays well enough and they can get him on a decent deal, like a 2-year deal and structure it a certain way where they can maybe get out of it, or 3-year deal that they can get out of early if they need to, you know, I think you can do that and you can still have JJ McCarthy kind of on the shelf. I mean, look, Jordan Love sat for 3 years before he
Mm.
played. Aaron Rodgers sat for 3 years before he played. It doesn't necessarily mean that JJ McCarthy has to play in
Right.
2025 if Sam plays well enough.
Skol 08 says, do you think a veteran quarterback will be able to do good against our defense? The most experienced quarterback we played was Danny Dimes. Well, yeah and no. I mean, CJ Stroud was the best offensive rookie that we've seen in a long time. And Jordan Love played all of last season and has been in the league for quite some time. And Brock Purdy was in the Super Bowl last year. So I don't really
Brock Purdy
think
was an
those
MVP
guys.
candidate last year.
Yeah, I don't think those. Well, I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like Aaron Rodgers is more experienced than everyone because he's 40 years old, but it's not like those guys are short on experience and that would cause the specific problem. It's not like they faced 2 hot rookies or something. These were established, really, really good quarterbacks. How do you think Rodgers is going to look against this defense, though? Because I think even though he has been moving okay, blitzing the crap out of him sounds like something that Brian Flores would want to do here.
I just I think the Jets are a mess right now. I think with just Aaron Rodgers looks 40, which Aaron Rodgers being 40 and say like Kirk Cousins or somebody being 40 is different. So I understand like Aaron Rodgers has there's sort of a higher floor for 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, but he looks 40 years old right now, and that
Yeah.
team just doesn't look very good. There seems to be some behind the scenes issues going on between Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh. You kind of wonder what's going on with the chemistry there of the team. Everybody's talking about how they're a team that should go after Devontae Adams right now, because they might need some more weapons outside of Garrett Wilson. So I think, and maybe I'm wrong on this because London games can tend to be a little weird. I think Brian Flores is going to have a lot of fun on Sunday morning. I really do.
Well, because the biggest thing that Flores forces you to do is to make changes at the line of scrimmage. And if Aaron Rodgers is only on the same page with Alan Lazard because he can only throw to old Packers wide receivers,
Yeah,
then that might cause some problems. And I think that's what you really want. What you want, and even if it costs you a big play here or there, what you want is to be so frustrating for Rodgers at the line of scrimmage and force him to repeatedly check things, repeatedly change things, show all sorts of different looks because you're not asking Rodgers to do it. Of course, Rodgers can do it, but you're asking the receivers to do it. You're asking the line to do it. And they already had those problems last week where Vance Joseph dominated them in that game by blitzing a ton. And I think the big issue was more that they couldn't, the offensive line with the protections and the receivers, they couldn't get on the same page with Aaron Rodgers, the same way that David Bakhtiari and all those Packers that they had for so long had figured out how to do that with him. But what you really are looking for is by the end of the second drive, Rodgers is going,
yeah.
like to his wide
Eye
receiver.
rolls and just
Yes.
frustrated. Yeah,
Yeah,
annoyed.
you want
Yeah,
yes, you want him making faces because and I think the way to do that is to show a ton of different looks. The only concern I would have is that Braylon Allen in the backfield has been really good, and Breece Hall needs a bounce back game after playing horribly. That they might try to really lean on their run game. Conrad says our run game still needs work. I'm watching a rerun of the Vikings Packers game on NFL Network, and we struggle to get big push inside the 10-yard line on running plays. They clearly, Manny, do not trust Garrett Bradbury and Ed Ingram when it comes to running the ball in the middle of the field. They
yeah,
just don't. And Kenny Clark is in there. I get it. They've had some good defensive tackles they've faced, but when you get down on 3rd and 1 at the goal line, you put in Marcus Allen and Kimball Anders, and you have that guy go into the pile behind what? Joe Alt, Joe Alt's dad, who was a big giant dude, or Will Shields when they had Jamal Charles. I don't know why the Chiefs came to mind for that, but I just thought how successful Marcus Allen just used to score a touchdown every time he got to the goal line. I guess if we were using a Vikings, we might say Chester Taylor or Scotty Graham or something, put somebody behind Jim Kleinsaucer, run right behind Steve Hutchinson. They just don't have it. They just don't have that automatic push in the middle that makes that play simple. I also think that Kevin O'Connell doesn't like to make things simple. I think that he likes to make things harder on himself than it has to be. It
yeah.
has to be a brilliant route combination. It has to be a clever reverse handoff, which has sometimes works. It's just, I mean, maybe try it. I asked Jeremiah Searles this earlier this week, and he said, put CJ Ham over on the left side, Josh Oliver, run behind Christian Darrisaw and Blake Brandel, and just power it right up the middle. And you've got a good chance to score there. But it's so clear that they don't trust the interior of the line. And I don't know if that's going to change. So they're going to need probably Sam Darnold to be really good in the red zone.
Yeah, and maybe it's just one of those things where I don't I don't know how, there's got to be other ways. Like if you get down near the goal line inside the 1 or 2 yard line and you're just trying to get into the end zone, it just might be one of those things where he has to get, KOC has to get creative. Or there was this sort of the short touchdown pass to Josh Oliver, which was kind of nice. You know what I mean? They found a way to get that working. That might just be something that they have to do. Yeah, I mean the fact that Ed Ingram is just not really good at much of anything right now is kind of a concern. a big concern, actually. But yeah, I mean, it might just be one of those situations where they just have to. You're gonna have to get maybe creative. Don't get too cute, but get kind of creative to find ways to get because you even look back at trying to ice the game on Sunday, where they tried the what was it that the handoff to Jalen Naylor that ended up
Yeah.
getting stopped short on
Yep.
fourth down. I
Yep.
mean that's a situation in a play where that should be easily converted. You just
Yep.
got to find a way to get that converted. And on Sunday it didn't come back to bite them, but it might be a situation down the line later this season where it does come back to bite them because they can't convert a third and short or a fourth and short because they don't have the interior offensive linemen to be able to get a push to allow that to be converted. So it's going to be tricky for sure.
Okay, I got another question for you. Then we need your Jets. Then we need our pick'ems.
Hmm.
And this has been a really good discussion. I just looked up and didn't realize that we've been going for a while here. So I will get to a few more comments. I'll make sure that I answer comments after Manny runs as well. But Mike says we should lean more on what we are seeing versus what we might see. We're not seeing Sam crater games, but he has in the past. Fine, imagine raising your kids that way with "I expect you to fail." Well, we aren't raising children, Mike. We're talking about football, and what people have done in the past matters. It just does. But as far as Vikings seasons go, Randall Cunningham's recent past with the Philadelphia Eagles didn't matter to the 98 Vikings. Case Keenum's recent past with the Houston Texans and the Rams didn't matter to the 2017 Vikings until the very end in the NFC Championship and kind of the second half of the game against New Orleans in the Miracle Game. But that's how sports work. I mean, if you get who was the first baseman, I will think of him, played in AAA for a long time, Chris Colabello, and he goes up to the major leagues. He's a AAA guy, comes up
Twins
to the
fans remember
Twins.
him. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And he starts crushing. But you've got to be wondering, is this going to continue? And it turned out he was using steroids, and that's why it continued. But you had to wonder, okay, this guy was in AAA his whole career, and then he comes up at a later age and he starts hitting bombs left and right. That's not to say that I don't think it will with Sam Darnold. But you have to ask the question. You would be disingenuous if you didn't. You wouldn't be doing this in a way to be accurate, which is what we're trying to be in prognosticating this and guessing where it's going to go without bringing up just the simple fact that Sam Darnold has turned the ball over a lot in his career. I think that they've created bumper cars for him, or what are they? Yeah, bumpers in bowling. So
Hmm.
where he tries to go in the gutter and they go, doop, there's Jefferson wide open. It goes right back and knocks the pins down. That's what Sunday was against the Packers. It was like Sam Darnold kind of tries to botch it in some ways with the interception and doop, right back to the middle. And what an unbelievable catch Jefferson makes along the sideline. But history matters in sports. It always does, no matter who you are into the analysis. I think that it will continue, but to what level is very much unknown, which makes football interesting because you just never know. You want to do your favorite Jets now, Manny? Because
Oh yeah.
I just imagine that you were frothing at the mouth thinking about your favorite Jets of all time when the Vikings play a non-divisional game. For those new to the program, welcome. But Manny always looks at his favorite players of all time from the opposing team when it's not the Lions, Bears, or Packers. We'd just be doing that all the time. So, New York Jets, very unique and interesting opponent. What have you, Mr. Hill?
Okay, I will start with number 5, and I didn't. I'm too young to have seen this guy in his heyday in the 1980s with the Jets. But just watching highlights and just you look at the numbers, Mark Gastineau, man, was an
Oh,
absolute
yeah.
beast in the
Sack exchange.
1980s.
Yep.
The New York Sack Exchange. The guy was like literally insane. He was nuts. But it honestly, I think it really added to his character and made him a great football player in the 1980s. He retired very early. I think at like 32 years old. There was some some controversy behind it because he thought that uh, Brigitte Nielsen, who he was dating at the time, was like sick or something like that, and that's why he retired suddenly, but people were like questioning if that was like actually legitimately true. And
I don't even know
uh,
this story. That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, and then so he retired at like 32, and he retired as the NFL's all-time leader in sacks. Now,
Mm,
sacks didn't become an official stat until 1982.
right.
But I mean, you just go and look at his numbers, like in the mid to late 80s. This guy was just a sack machine. I'm talking 19, 20. He had a 22 sack season once. I think in I think it was 1987. Maybe I may be wrong on that. 86, one of those years. But Mark Gastineau, an absolute beast. And you just go back and look at some of his highlights, and that guy was a scary, scary football player.
I just want to point out because absolutely that sack exchange. Sometimes I think if we had more access, and of course, like you said, we didn't see him, but if we had more access to some of the players from eras where you just couldn't watch anyone, how much more they would have been appreciated. And Gastineau is probably one of them. But I have to put this comment on the screen because I was laughing about it, about Kevin O'Connell in the red zone. No trick wide receiver halfback throws.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Yes, I
Yeah. That's what I
completely
was talking
agree
about,
with.
being too cute. Stop
Yes,
doing that. Don't do that,
completely
KOC.
agree. Let us never again have Ty Chandler raise the ball up like he's going to throw it when all you need is a field goal to win the game. I want to make a little chart of scores for Kevin O'Connell that just says like this is 2 scores, and if you go up by those 2, you're probably in good shape. Like, or last week with it would have been 31-7 is 4 scores. That would be 3 touchdowns and a field goal. Just circle the number 4. There is no way that team scores 4 times. No way. So don't throw in the red zone. Anyway, doesn't matter. What is your number 4 Jet? If they just beat the Jets and don't do anything too cute, I'll move on. Okay. But for this whole week, I've woken up in the middle of the night being like, run the ball. Run the ball. Huh? What? Who's there? Just hand off. Aaron Jones right there. Just hand off. And my wife's like, what are you doing it again? You're yelling at Kevin O'Connell about not running when he's up 28-7. Oh, sorry.
Number 4 of my favorite Jets of all time is a wide receiver, Wayne Corbett,
Oh,
who was
yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very good in some of those sort of the Bill Parcells into I think was it Al Groh for a year, and then Herm Edwards kind of
Herm,
became
yeah.
the coach. Yeah. So then Wayne Corbett was kind of like a staple of those teams, kind of in the late 90s into the early to mid 2000s. And just one of those reliable guys that just he could catch just about everything that you threw towards him, and just a really good professional wide receiver. I think really underrated for a number of years.
No gloves, right? He was
Yeah,
a no gloves guy.
that's
Yeah.
right.
And
Yep.
if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he the Adam Thielen of the day? Didn't he go to some school no one heard of or something?
I think so.
I will look this up while you give your next one. But I think that was the case for Wayne Corbett. Great pick, though. I mean, just a great route runner, tough over the middle of the field when you had to be tough. And he was probably 5'9" or something. Okay.
Hofstra. He
He
went to
went to
Hofstra.
Hofstra. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I
people
just
have
looked
heard
it
of
up.
that college, but he was undrafted, 5'10", 188 pounds. There is no reason that a human being like that should be in the National Football League, considering all the freak athletes in the universe. I always love that about him. So great pick.
Darrelle Revis is number 3, just one of the all-time great, I think, cover corners. One of the last real like pure cover corners that we've had in the NFL, in the modern NFL, and really just went through a couple of different head coaches. Eventually, of course, went to New England and won a Super Bowl with the Patriots. But just really one of the elite cover corners of his time, and got a gold jacket too. So well deserved.
I mean, one of the best players of all time, I think. One of
Yep.
the most unstoppable. And this is one of the things I really truly love about the analytics era, Manny, is that we have the ability to put a finger on exactly how good Darrelle Revis was. And it was astoundingly good as far as shutting down the best wide receivers in the NFL. And he was the perfect combination. And Stephon Gilmore is a light version of this, but it's so cool to see because when I through my time covering football, have talked to cornerbacks. I am about 6'2", so it rarely am I looking them in the face. And when I am, and they also run a 4-4 or 4-3, I think Darrelle Revis ran, and they have the wingspan, you go, how does anybody ever get open against you? That's the way I feel. That's the way I feel with Stephon Gilmore, because he's just as tall as I am. I'm like, dude, how does anyone get, you're huge with the flexibility and everything else, but he had strength and he had a technical way about his game that was just beautiful to watch. That there was no cheese to his game. There was no, I'm just going to jump passes and things like that to get notoriety. I'm going to play the technique and just fantastic player. Couldn't like him anymore.
Number 2 is Chad Pennington, and Chad was just he was just fun, man. Obviously didn't have like the biggest arm of the quarterbacks that you see, but was just a pro and just a guy that was really reliable, safe with the football, didn't turn the ball over a lot, didn't throw a lot of picks, and had some success and won some games as a Jets quarterback, and then kind of had a little bit of a resurgence in Miami with Tony Sperano, rest in peace, in 2008, where he kind of got casted off. You know, the Jets had kind of moved on. I think it was like Kellen Clemens or something they had moved on
Yes.
to at
Yeah.
that point from Chad Pennington. But, you know, Chad kind of, revived his career in Miami a little bit, had one more like really good season with the Dolphins, and was just a pro quarterback. And for all us Vikings fans, remember the quarterback throwing all those touchdowns to Randy Moss at Marshall, Chad Pennington. So
Chad Pennington was, how about this? A gutsy Kirk Cousins in his day. I like that description, a gutsy Kirk Cousins. And if they played more wide open back in the day, he probably would have had much bigger stats. And they asked a lot of quarterbacks back in that era, straight dropbacks and stuff like that. If they had done things they do offensively now with his accuracy, the way he led an offense, maybe tall Brock Purdy would be the way to
sure,
describe what Chad Pennington was. Always liked him as a quarterback as well. But he was, the reason I would say he was more gritty Kirk Cousins is just there was always a little shortcoming in the playmaking. It wasn't there to the point where he could be a difference maker, and the arm, the pure arm, he was accurate. He was smart. He was tough, but he just didn't have that next gear to
right.
get over the top. But play with a lot of heart. Who's your number one? People are already
Number
taking bets about who your number one is going to be. Number one on your list, all-time favorite Jet.
You will love this one. It's one of the great running backs of all time, Curtis Martin, my
Yeah.
favorite Jet of all time. Just a great, great, great player, and really ironically had probably the best season of his career late in his career in
Yeah.
2004 when he ran for almost 1,700 yards. I think he was 31, 32 years old, won the rushing title, and just really just one of the all-time great running backs, obviously, one of the all-time great just human beings, honestly, just a great teammate, and obviously was rewarded as being a Hall of Famer as well. So Curtis Martin, my number one favorite Jet of all time.
If you watch his A Football Life documentary, which I saw they're going to do one on Jefferson, this is weird to me because he's still young and really young in his career. That's odd that they're doing it at this point. They usually do it on retired players or guys whose careers are over, but I don't know. Anyway, that Martin's is the best. My favorite, number one. All those documentaries are so good. They're time capsules of history. They're really beautifully done. But that one is the one that will kind of rip your guts out. And he tells some crazy stories about his upbringing, but also his relationship with Parcells is really special. And the heart that the guy played with, the toughness that he played with, he could do everything. Honestly, Aaron Jones reminds me of him, like a smaller version of him, because he could catch, he runs through people. He's never, ever down. And I think a deserved Hall of Fame player, one of my favorites as well. A lot of potential. Oh, yes, very much.
Super
yes.
durable.
Yes. A lot of other options that are left on the table. Of course, Joe Willie, depending on your age, Don Maynard, the all-time greats. Personally, I would have had Vinny Testaverde on the list. I absolutely loved Vinny Testaverde. Look, if you're looking for a Sam Darnold lookalike, 12-1 that one season, it's Vinny Testaverde. He was a first overall bust. He threw tons of interceptions, or I don't know if he's first overall, but high first round draft pick bust. And he threw tons of picks with a horrible joke of a team in Tampa Bay. Arrives with the Lions. They put everything around him. He's great. Thomas Jones was a great one for me.
Yeah.
Keyshawn Johnson deserves a nomination. But how about this fella? Maybe not underrated at the time because of his name. DeBrickashaw Ferguson. What a player. What a
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
DeBrickashaw Ferguson, everyone. How is that person not on the list? Him and Nick Mangold. Mo Lewis gets credit for, knocking Drew Bledsoe out of a game, but he was a phenomenal player back in the day. They had, around the Boomer Esiason era, they had some good players, but weren't great teams. Like Rob Moore was a good receiver for them. Now we're way down the list here of New York Jets, but a team with a really fun history to go through. Another one, Lavernius Coles. What a great wide
Oh,
receiver.
yeah.
Oh, Testaverde did go number one. I thought so. But what a great wide receiver Lavernius Coles was back in the day. So this will be fun. Let's get your pick'ems, Manny.
Okay.
And then you will decide who you think is going to win this game. Aaron Jones. Oh, I should say, I'm sorry. I just jumped right into this. But this, of course, is presented by, hold on, let me get up the ad read live here. Okay, there we go. Underdog Fantasy, folks. This is where we will be doing our pick'ems as always, because the show is presented by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Our favorite thing is to look at Vikings games and players and go higher or lower on between 2 and 8 players, which you can do along with us by downloading the best app in fantasy sports at Underdog Fantasy. If you go 5 for 5, you can earn 20 times your money. So use that promo code PURPLE to claim your special pick and first time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So you sign up, you put your money in, you get your bonus cash, you're playing just like we are. Must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. Okay, now, see, I got overexcited. Aaron Jones played a lot of football last week, Manny. Would you go higher or lower on 92.5 rushing and receiving yards for Aaron Jones?
This game is going to be tricky. I actually kind of think this game is going to be low scoring. Because the Jets, for all of their issues on offense with Rodgers, they still have a pretty good defense. Not a great defense, but pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And London games are weird, and sometimes we see these games be kind of sloppy. And so I don't think we're going to see a lot of offense in this game. So I will say less, but not a whole lot less. Like, so it's what, 92.5?
92.5. Yeah.
I'll say less, but it's probably going to be like something in the 80s.
I would like to see Ty Chandler more involved in this game and maybe less of Aaron Jones playing 50 plus snaps. That I just don't think that's good for long term. But when you talk about running and passing, that's where they are going to be really juiced up to go up against the screen game, because the Vikings screen game has just been so good that I think teams are going to start paying a lot of attention to it. When they look like they're going to go for a screen, everyone's going to be crashing down on Aaron Jones. Although after I watched the film, I understand why this works so well, because KOC sells that it's not a screen. Like they drop back and they look like it's not, and then they develop into a screen kind of late, which is an interesting little twist, because usually that starts right at the snap. The guys start to move out. But in this case, they let the receivers get a little vertical first and then have Garrett Bradbury sneak out. So maybe they'll keep doing it. But the point is exactly what you're talking about, that if it's low scoring and they're using Chandler a little more and they're attacking Aaron Jones, their run defense has not always been ideal. Maybe it stays low. Well, would you have the same logic about 220.5 yards for Sam Darnold, higher or lower on that?
I'll say higher, but not much higher. So I'll say higher. But again, I think it's going to be a low scoring game. I just don't think we're going to see a lot of offensive. How many yards did Sam have last week?
275.
275. Yeah. See, I don't know if he's going to get that many, but I'll say more.
All right. I will give you a Jets one before we wrap up. Brees Hall, awful game. Shockingly bad game last week. Does he bounce back? Because you mentioned, and I'm not trying to push it one way or another, Manny, but low scoring game could mean the Jets actually run the ball and keep running against the Vikings, which no one has been able to do so far because they just fall behind by so much. 52.5 rushing yards for Brees Hall. Higher or lower?
I'll say lower. I'll say lower.
You just think he's not good?
No, I think
that's fair if you don't. There's no sample size of him being all that good.
I think Brees Hall is really good. I also think Josh Jacobs is really good, but he just wasn't super. I mean, he had a couple of Josh Jacobs had a couple of nice runs on Sunday, but I just think and it was a different situation. The Packers fell behind, so they had to kind of throw their way back into it. And it might not be the same case for the Jets, but I just think this Vikings defense is so good at really taking control of games and dictating what the other team is going to do. And I think they're going to want to put Aaron Rodgers in a lot of situations where he's going to have to throw the ball a lot, and he's going to get really frustrated, and he's going to want to throw the ball more because he's frustrated, and he wants to, he wants to continue to try and win the game. And I think it's just going to be ugly, and I think it's going to kind of take Brees Hall out of the game. So I'll say less.
Okay, I like that. I also think they're just going to mix it up with him and Allen in the backfield. They have to do that. And Allen's is 32.5, which I might go higher on that one. But I'll give you my stone cold dead lock of the week here of London. The London lock is what I'm going to give you right here. Will Reichard higher than 6.5 points in this game. Guaranteed. These games are always messy. They're sometimes just calamities on grass because the time change and it's so difficult to do the whole thing and all the distractions and the turf and everything else, that Will Reichard will be the reason the Minnesota Vikings win this football game, and he will score a higher total than 6.5 points. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. This game just has like 20-10, maybe 20-13 kind of vibes to it. These London games are always just really, really, really tricky. And it's the Jets have been playing some ugly games this year too. I mean, I know the weather was kind of a factor in the game against Denver last week, but the Jets just don't look very good offensively. And I think it's going to play right into the Vikings' hands.
Okay. So do they win?
Yes. Vikings
20-17. Is that the way you're going?
I'm going to go 20-13.
I like it. With all field goals except for one touchdown and a missed extra point or something. I don't know. Maybe that doesn't add up to 20. We'll see. Yeah. I mean, this is one where for the first time, probably everyone is picking the Vikings because they have proven it. They've been this good, which maybe that means that it'll be the first time they lose. I think that the London factors are the ones that are the most scary to this team, because on every other part of the football field, the Vikings are better than the New York Jets. And maybe, I don't know who their punter is, but maybe even a punter. So we will find out what happens. Manny, it's been a fun week again with you, a fun week of podcasts. There's two more on the way for you folks following us on either YouTube or on the podcast feed, with Will Parkinson from Turn on the Jets giving his perspective on Sam Darnold, and then also Andrew Kramer and I with our hardcore previews. So it's been a super, super fun week. I appreciate all you guys in the chat. Always so much fun. If you missed last night, 3 hours of chatting, and as I was walking down to the studio, my wife said, "You're not going to be doing this for 3 hours again tonight, are you?" I'm like, okay, no. But you guys had a lot of, I didn't even answer everyone's question last night. And I was 2 hours and 46 minutes into it. I lost my voice. So anyway, great stuff from everybody. Thank you so much, Manny. And we will see you all very soon. And make sure, of course, the next time live will be after the game with Dane Mizutani. And that will be really fun. So thanks again. And we'll catch you all soon. Football